Charlie services.
Ishmael. Today I'm going to do something I seldom do. I'm not going to read from the New Testament. I'm going to read from the Old one. Herman Melville is perhaps one of the greatest authors in American history when it comes to insights into the inner struggle of spirituality. And anyone who has read Moby Dick must come away staggered. That strange book begins with those words, "Call me Ishmael." And it begins with Ishmael, the author who calls himself by that name, wandering down through the old roads of New England before the coming of heavy traffic, and finding his way to New Bedford, where the whaling vessels lie in port. And if you go to New Bedford, you will find there still a chapel built like a ship, in which the message of God was preached to those who were about to go forth in the whaling vessels, many of whom would never return. And this is the story of the anguish of the sea captain who goes in search of the mythical beast, the white whale. This is the original story of Ishmael, and its relevance to today's world will soon be seen. The birth of Ishmael. Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maid, a servant girl named Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from bearing. So go in to my maid. Perhaps I shall have children through her." Abram listened to Sarah. And after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, his wife, took Hagar, her Egyptian maid, and gave her to Abram in this fashion, to her husband to be his wife. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she was aware that she had conceived, she looked with disdain upon her mistress. And then Sarah said to Abram, "The injury done to me is your fault. I gave my maid to your embrace, and when she was aware she'd conceived, she looked at me with disdain. The Lord judge between you and me." And Abram answered Sarah, "Your maid is in your power. She is your slave. Do to her what seems good to you." Then Sarah humiliated Hagar, and Hagar fled from her into the desert. And afterward an angel of the Lord found her beside a spring of water in the desert, the spring on the road to Sur. And he said, "Hagar, maid of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going?" And she answered, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority." And the angel of the Lord added, "I will multiply your posterity so that it shall be too many to count." And the angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are with child, and you shall bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard of your humiliation. He shall be a wild ass of a man, and his hand shall be against everyone, and everyone's hand shall be against him, and he shall dwell apart, opposing all his kinsmen." She named the Lord who spoke to her, "Truly you are the God of vision." For she said, "Have I really seen God and remained alive after my vision?" Therefore the well was called Be'er Laharoi, that is, the well between Kadesh and Barad. And so Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called his son whom Hagar bore Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. And after the birth of Isaac, Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, Ishmael, whom Hagar had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. And she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave girl with her son, for the son of this slave girl shall not be heir with my son Isaac." The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Be not distressed on account of the boy and your slave girl. Heed all that Sarah says to you, for through Isaac shall your descendants be called. But I will also make the son of the slave girl a great nation, because he also is your offspring." And Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave them to Hagar, placing them on her shoulder. Then he dismissed her with the child, and she departed, wandering about the desert of Beerseba. And when the water from the bottle was gone, she left the child under a bush. Then she went and sat opposite the place at about a distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not see the child die." She sat opposite the spot, and the child cried aloud. And God heard the boy's cry. And the angel of God called Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's the matter, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the boy's cry in this plight of his. Rise up, take the boy, be assured in his regard, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw well. And she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. And he lived in the desert and became an expert bowman. And he lived in the desert of Paran. And his mother chose a wife for him in the land of Egypt. You find that a rather poignant reading from the gospel today? I do. The story of Ishmael is the story of the lost brother. All the Arab nation calls Ishmael their father. Ask any Muslim you happen to meet, and he will tell you so. And they call Hagar their mother. Hagar means wandering in the Semitic languages. You see Hagar is always out wandering around in the desert. Notice that Hagar is an Egyptian. And notice that she is a slave. And that Hagar begins by being thrown out once and ends by being thrown out twice. There is no indication she ever was allowed to go back the second time. The name of the pilgrimage that Arabs make, Muslims make, from all over the world to Mecca every year is called the Hagirah. And though, of course, it is the great trip, next year in Jerusalem, the Jews say, next year in Mecca, the Muslims say, this trip is called the Hagirah after their mother Hagar, who also wandered in the desert in search of the holy place. And notice something else about Hagar. She cries out, "Surely you are the God of vision." Notice the critical nature of that statement. I think there is no place in the entire Bible where the essential mechanics of all great religion are laid forth more barely than in the words of Hagar. Surely you are the God of vision. And it is clearly stated that vision is the essential quality upon which the nature of God depends. In reading up for this story, I looked at the name of the wanderings of Abraham, or Abram as he was then called, as he came into the promised land from a land that was originally known as Enkira, Ki-en-kira, which we call Sumer. And as he wandered in to this land, he first came to a great mountain called Mount Ebal, which is right in the middle of what we now call Palestine. And on the other side, across from Mount Ebal, is Mount Gerizim, and between them is a long valley. And this long valley is called the Valley of Moreh, or Moreh. And the name of the Valley of Moreh, it says that Abraham came and camped at Shechem, the shoulder, the pass, in the great Valley of Moreh, which is called the Noble Valley, or the valley that reaches and enters far. Very strange here, this statement first about vision, and something about valleys that reach and enter far. For this valley that reaches and enters far is very similar to that long tunnel with the light at the end, isn't it? And that the thing that leads us into the long tunnel with the light at the end is vision. And that sometimes there opens within ourselves a window in which the God of vision speaks to us. And it was through such a window of vision, as is commemorated in the Valley of Moreh, that this woman Hagar has a vision of God. She who was a slave girl and who is rejected has a vision of God speaking to her from far. And the name that is given to her son, Ishmael. What does Ishmael mean? God hears. Wow, what a lot of stuff. You know, what an immense amount about the essential quality of the religious experiences involved. If one could meditate on this alone for a month or a year, one would get somewhere. In the valley that reaches and enters far, the window of vision, one is assured in the depths of one's spirit that God hears. Especially in the moment when we are cast out. Now, I didn't know I was going to talk about this, but joy is like the rain. In the moment of sorrow, the promise of joy. So it is. And so is the story. And notice what it says about God hears. Curiously, Ishmael and Israel are words that sound very much alike, aren't they? And there are three men named in this scripture as it goes on. Ishmael first, then Isaac, and then Israel. They're all very close relatives. Ishmael, God hears. Isaac, the boy laughs. Israel, man fights God. Oh, quite a story. First, there is the assurance from the mother, the remembrance of motherhood, in which God hears, and you feel and believe that God hears. And if you don't believe that God hears, you are without hope. But if beneath all you believe that God hears, you have hope. And when you have hope, there is joy. Laughing boy. There is laughter and delight. But then, when you become a man, as Paul says, you put away childish things, and what happens? Israel, man fights against the God whom he has heard in his childhood. and thus is the struggle of our lives. Oh, boy, that's really true. And here in this story is the mother of all religion, as far as we know it. It is clearly the mother of Israel and those people we call the Jews. It is clearly the mother of Christ and those people that we call the Christians. And it is clearly the mother of Muhammad and those people we call Islam. And we are all involved in those common basic mechanics by the story of our origin. And all of those religions are about this one essential vision. Is there in this a basis of union, brotherhood? Is there here a hope for peace? A basis for peace that comes not from a future possibility alone, but from a past reality. If we could somehow come to terms with the common nature of our original vision, could we find a reason to be at one with one another at last? The world is becoming a single tribe. I talked to somebody yesterday about John Steinbeck and the Holy Grail. And I said the wonderful thing about the Celtic story of Arthur and the Grail is it's the closest thing to our consciousness of our tribal origin. And that's exactly what it is. The story of Arthur and the Grail is the story that we remember of our tribal origin. Whether we're Celtic or not doesn't make any difference. In our civilization, the Celtic tribal origin is the one that strikes the bell most quickly for all of us and somehow seems to belong to everyone. Here in this story of the Bible is the story of tribes. Tribal origin and tribal conflict. When Ibn Saud, the great father of Saudi Arabia, was asked what purpose and what future he saw for the Arab people, he said, Arabs? Who are they? All I know are the tribes. Who are these Arabs? In the tribal consciousness, we are the people. You look at the map of California and the names of all the Indians. And the name of almost every Indian tribe means the people in their language. You see that consciousness in the early story of Israel, don't you? We are the chosen people. To hell with all the rest of you. Right? That kind of tribal consciousness, which Ibn Saud commemorates, was there anybody who killed each other with more abandon than the Bedouin tribes of the days of Ibn Saud? Absolutely not. You notice that in this scripture here, the central place where everything seems to happen is a well. And in a desert country, you would begin to appreciate that very quickly. Perhaps in Monterey, we will soon have a desalinization plant. Will be where everything happens. I think there might be a place to sit over here. Inside, come on over. But that this well was a place of war, and every well belonged to a particular tribe. And if a tribesman from another well was found drinking there, he was killed on the spot and dragged through the street in commemoration of a victory. Bloody is what it was, tribal warfare. Have we progressed very far from there? No. Now it isn't tribes that fight each other, it's what we call nations, which are just a bigger version of the tribe. But just as all those tribes really spoke the same language, and really had the same religion, and really had the same God. And after all, even though Ibn Saud made a cynical remark, he knew who the Arabs were. They were all one people, and all the children of Ishmael. Well, now it begins to appear that the children of Ishmael are all the children of Abraham, and all the peoples of the Western world are children of Abraham. And the tribal divisions turn out to be just as ridiculous as they were at the wells in the desert of Arabia. I saw a lovely thing on television the other day. It was a picture of an American doctor on a hospital ship treating Iraqi prisoners. Did you see that? And here were the Iraqis, all shell-shocked. They say that the Iraqi army, at least the one on the Kuwait-Saudi border, is totally shell-shocked. And they're all going into fetal positions whenever anything hear a bomb go off. And you could see it in these Iraqis sitting on a hospital ship. They were just like this. But somebody was going around handing them a bottle of water. Did you notice in the scripture? And Abraham was very sorry that Sarah made Hagar go into the desert, and he gave her bread and a bottle of water. You know, joy is like the rain. And God saw Abraham's travail of spirit and said, "Don't worry about Hagar. I know what problems you have with your wives. Just let her go. I'll take care of her." And with great regret, Abraham lets her go. But he loved Hagar, you see. And he loved his son Ishmael, you see. And notice that this Jewish book, Genesis, says so. And later on, it actually says directly, and Ishmael is the father of the Arabs, our mortal enemies. Throughout the entire Old Testament, the Jews and the Arabs are fighting. All the way through. But it's a civil war. It's a war between brothers. A civil war. Let me say again to you what I've said the last few Sundays. This war in Iraq is a civil war. We all have the sense of that. When I watched those Iraqi prisoners sitting there on that hospital ship, I thought, yes, this is a civil war, and those men are my brothers. I hope everybody sees this. Those men are my brothers. And I saw the doctor come up, and they had, because these guys were all in shock of a certain kind, they had them all covered with little blankets. And the doctor was coming up and adjusting the blankets because the guy was so shell-shocked he couldn't hold it, and he was adjusting the blanket to cover him up so he wouldn't be cold. Orange blankets, yes. And I thought, yes, that is where the peace may be, is in the fact that we will all see this and understand that these are our brothers. But you notice what the scripture also says. Ishmael, he will be a wild ass of a man, a bowman and a hunter and a wild thing and dangerous in the mountains. But he's still your brother. And then I think of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein is a wild ass of a man. He is dangerous and deranged, full of sickness. I keep hearing myself say, Saddam Hussein, sad man, Saddam Hussein. Notice when you look at him, he looks sad. Have you ever noticed that? Every photograph, even the one where he's smiling and waving, he still looks sad. He's not only sad, he's a sad sadist. He's your brother too. There's a little part of us that's all like Saddam too, you know. And when we seek his death, this also is very sad. It's a puzzlement, isn't it? You know? Let it begin with me, though. Let all of us recognize that Saddam has got us all in touch with our sadness, hasn't he? And that we're all terribly sad about this. All of us. I notice now that since the war may end very quickly now, may possibly end very quickly, I noticed that Saddam Hussein is beginning to act like the Iraqis on the hospital ship. Came out the other day that he's been severely tranquilized because he is in a state of near neurotic breakdown. He got the message. Suddenly, it's beginning to appear to him what he has done. And if he does break down, someone will surely kill him. Some of his brothers, some of the members of his own staff. Did you see the other day in Paris, one of his bodyguards speaking, who predicts the death of Saddam Hussein before the 15th of this month, and says that he's hiding out, confidently expecting the death of Saddam Hussein within 2 weeks, at the hands of his own bodyguard. And one of his bodyguards ought to know, shouldn't he? And but before he is killed, of course, he comes into conflict with his own sadness and his own nervous breakdown. And all of that is sadder still. And then, who picks up the pieces? Of Iraq. Iraq, the cradle of civilization. Iraq, Kiengira is in Iraq. Sumer, the mother of civilization. Akkad, the first daughter of civilization. And Ashur, all in Iraq. Babylon, Elam, all the ancient names. The records are there. The origin of our quest and our journey as a nation, as a people, all begins there. Not only is this nation our brother, but our father and mother and grandfather and grandmother too. It is essential that we should make peace with this nation and have pity on it, because we have seen the enemy and he is us. The Iraqi people, it is very plain, like Saddam Hussein far less than we do. And they're very sad about him. If you see what the Arab Americans, what kind of a travail they are going through now, being blasted and battered at every side by bigots of various kinds. And they're throwing up their hands and saying, but we don't like him either. You know? We wish he'd go away. Will it just please stop? You know? And one Iraqi say, who lives in Detroit, trying to fight his way up through that melange of Detroit, which it's become, says, you know what it's like being an Iraqi today? It's like being, like standing out in the middle of a freeway and seeing a truck coming toward you and not being able to run and crying out, please stop. Well, I think that's the right attitude toward all of this. Will you please stop? And how make peace? When this war is over, Iraq will lie prostrate. Totally prostrate. Not just because it's been conquered, nobody may even cross the border. It'll still be prostrate. And in immediate danger of dissolution. The Kurds will break off to the north. The Sunnis break off, or the Shiites break off in the middle, and the Sunnis in the south. And we're liable to have at least 3 nations where we once had one. And each one of those nations are likely to be grabbed by a neighbor, by Iran or Syria or Turkey or somebody, or Saudi Arabia. And the mother of mankind's cradle will be divided up and again. Unless there can be some kind of peace. Fortunately, thank you, the nations are involved in peace there under curious auspices.